Hello and welcome. I'm Nima, and this is the Finding Nima Prodcast. That's right, Prodcast, because it's where I get to prod, probe, ask questions, and I hope you will take something away that you will ideally do something with. Today, I have a very special guest. Before we meet him, I want to say that this is brought to you by the Core Skills series. What does that mean? Well, you see, there are things that we do and use every single day of our lives, like words, like the way we are, like our voice. But we're not taught how to do these things in a way that helps us, really. So we do it, we use our voice, we are present, we use words. But if we know how to use them in a way that gets other people to tune into what we really want to say, what we really need, want, and do, I believe that everybody will be better off. So I created something called the Core Skills series. It's a series of online live events that I'm hosting that focus on one core skill at a time. At the very end, you leave with templates and how do I do it systems. It's really important to know how to do the things that we know we can and should do, right? So this is what I'm doing. If you want to find out more, get in touch or just go to finding-nima.com. Today we are very fortunate to have a fantastic human. He practices what he preaches. They're the best sort, I think. And he is a shining light, an expert on something so important, our voice. You know, if you think about it, our voice it's magical, really, isn't it? I mean, it's free. We use it instantly. And guess what? It does a lot more than just convey thoughts. It actually conveys feelings too. Let's meet our guest for today and dive into what it is I'm talking about. Please join me in meeting the Professor of Voice and Acting at Carnegie Mellon University and actor in his own right, Ausar Stewart. Ausar, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Hello.
Pleasure. Hello. Thank you for having me.
No, it's a pleasure, absolute pleasure. And in fact, you know, as I was making a cup of tea earlier, I had this thought plonk into my head, and it is this. I suppose one way of summing up your journey in a way is you've gone from looking at the way you can pass on feelings externally. So when you act, for example, it is a performance, it's people taking in what you are doing.
Yes.
To actually working on how to get people to change internally through things like voice. Is that a fair sort of culmination of your journey? So you used to be the external and now you are more the internal.
Yeah, I would say it's a fair combination, but I do want to sort of backtrack a little bit. And if I could share a story with you, because I read one of the questions that was asked about somebody being concerned about their accent and whether or not they could be understood. And I want to share that a formative experience I had was when I immigrated to Canada from Jamaica, and I was about 5 years old. I recall walking into the grade 1 class and being told I couldn't stay because I couldn't be understood. At that point, my Jamaican accent, my patois, as we would say, was perhaps a bit too broad to be understood. And I was devastated. It really threw me for a loop. And I recall at that point, as young as I was, making a vow that I would never, ever again be discriminated against based on how I spoke or didn't speak the King or Queen's English. So I chose to embrace voice and language as a means of fitting in, but also prospering in the society that I was living in, have been living in, that I would not ever again have that become an impediment. And that really set off a whole trajectory of my love affair with voice, language, speech, and identity, both internal and external.
Okay, so in fact, I was sent a very long sort of essay by somebody. It's interesting because I've had questions that have been very sent privately. So I'm not going to mention names just because of the nature of how I got the information. This person is Dutch. She's a chameleon. I mean, I call it being a sponge, meaning that you end up mimicking the accent that you are surrounded by. So when she's in one country, people think that she's from a different country because her partner is from that country. And she just finds that she constantly changes her accent to suit the occasion. And I think she's a bit, maybe, I don't know if she's lost her own accent, whatever that means to her, because she's an expatriate as well.
Right.
So she's an expat, she's married to somebody from somewhere else, and she lives in a place where many other expats live too. What's your take on this chameleon-like? It's her word. She said she's a chameleon.
It's a gift. Yeah. She's gifted. You know, in our world, in the theater, there are people who are, we call mimics. They have incredibly good ears, and their ears are tuned to their vocal folds in such a way that they can recreate sounds they hear almost instantaneously. It's a particularly unique skill. Not everybody has it. So she's fortunate. She has it as a gift. And those who don't have it have to work much harder to acquire those sounds. Right?
So do you feel, though, that making that deliberate decision to assimilate, have you left part of you behind? Does that make sense? Your Jamaican.
Absolutely. Well, it's a complex question, but it is connected to the very fabric of what it is to have a voice connected to who you are and your identity. And we do, as immigrants, find the need to somehow assimilate, right? And I wrote my actual thesis around this. It's interesting you're asking this question, because what I put forward is that language in and of itself doesn't contain meaning. It's the sounds in language that contains meaning. And deeper than that, it's the vibration of those sounds. So what that means is if you speak a particular language, you are literally encoded with certain sounds. And remembering is a physiological thing. To remember literally is to remember physiologically. So if you are not speaking certain sounds, thereby eliciting certain vibrations, thereby accessing certain memories embedded in one's tissue culturally, there are literally certain thoughts you can't think. Right?
Because there's no, yeah, I get that. So in fact, one experiment I would like to do, if anybody out there is listening and they have an MRI scan or something like that hanging around, please get in touch. The thing that I'm interested in when it comes to this is if we look at a brain, which centers light up when we use one language compared to another language. Say somebody's totally bilingual, totally bilingual.
Yes.
Which bits light up?
Well, that is a fascinating.
The same bits for each type of emotional reaction elicited.
That is a fascinating question. What I discovered was there was a woman who was a native English speaker, and when she learned to speak Spanish, her sense of time shifted, because in the Spanish language there is no such sense as an end result. Things are always in process. Things are always in the process of arriving. So culturally, you lose the attachment to being attached to an end result. It completely shifted her way of thinking and her way of being in the world. That I find fascinating, that not only can language shift your thought patterns and perhaps how your brain lights up, but how you actually are operating in the world.
It's fascinating.
It really is.
I hope we're not losing people listening because they perhaps tuned in thinking, how am I going to use my voice, But actually, this is all part of it, isn't it?
It is.
Because the voice, the voice is, one thing I say to people is, it's a free tool. You use it instantly. And guess what? It betrays you. And when I say it betrays you, what I mean is that it actually tells other people how you feel. So it's not just the words that you're saying or the sounds that you are making to pick up on your point. It is actually a lot more. So for example, there was this idea of how do we monitor people who are in training to be astronauts. So a group of people, astronauts in the making, they were put together for a long, long while, so many months, and people monitoring what was going on wanted a non-intrusive way of actually figuring out what was going on under the skin, essentially. They decided the best way is to monitor voice, because voice betrays how you feel. And I don't mean by somebody sounding angry. That's a much more subtle, deeper thing that I'm talking about. And specifically, it was high achievers that they wanted to look at, because high achievers and people who can mask and cope and all the other stuff, right?
Yes.
Guess what? their voice betrays them. So that was a great tool and way for people on the outside to really know what was going on the inside, so within the group, and on the inside of each person. So really what I want to segue into here is, let's talk a bit about voice and everyday use.
Yes.
One thing when we had a discussion recently, you mentioned, is that people come to you because it doesn't matter what profession you're in, by the way. It doesn't matter what level or phase of life you're in. It's not about that. It's about, I suppose, feeling that you're not seen, you're not heard, that you somehow vanish, disappear. So what is it that you do? Why do people come to you in the first place? Let's start there.
Yeah.
Other than actors.
Sure. I also want to reiterate what you're saying there, because in my experience, the voice, the human voice, is connected to every aspect of our being. That is physiological, psychological, emotional, and definitely even spiritual, right? It lives right in that middle place between the seen and the unseen, the material and the immaterial. And because it's sitting right in the very fabric of life itself, your breath, right? It reveals all. Everything that's ever happened to you is there imprinted on your voice. It's a complete blueprint of who you've been up until this point. So I'm not surprised to hear that they were using the voice to get an insight into what was under the skin of astronauts, because it is connected to every aspect of our being. So when people come to me, they're looking to be let loose, freed, uninhibited in some aspect of their being.
So, but what is it that makes them go, actually, there's something not quite right here? I mean, I'll give you an example. And I shared this just a couple of days ago on I think it was LinkedIn. I used to lose my voice like clockwork every 6 months. Bam, gone. Now my life is, I earn my living, essentially living through speaking, through voice, through making these sounds and noises, right?
Yes.
And at that time, I was on BBC World presenting a business and finance program, traveling a lot, in the thick of a lot, and it was very tense and stressful, plus other things going on in life too. And literally, the way I see it now is that my body, so I've got a strong mind, and I just kept going. And at one point, my body said, actually, you need to stop.
Yes. Absolutely.
Bam, no
Absolutely.
more voice, gone.
Yeah.
And it was just, if it had happened once, twice, that's, you'd think nothing of it, but every 6 months for quite some time. So that made me start realizing a lot of other stuff. And it's partly why I'm doing what I do at the moment, and why I created the Core Skills series.
Yes.
But the idea of people, is it their daily life? I mean, what is it that happens that goes, ping, I need to see somebody about this? What is that?
Life. Life itself is what happened. Life is what happened from the moment you arrived, as an infant, up until the point somebody walks in front of me, and life has played out on their psyche, their bodies, and their voices. I had a client who was studying to be a midwife and was absolutely committed to the profession, loved what she did, but couldn't gain the confidence of her mentors and her superiors, because she was always so anxious and nervous. So when she was with a client, it betrayed her actual skills as a midwife, because she couldn't make the clients feel safe. And she couldn't let her superiors feel that they could trust her. This was a communication issue. So when she sat down with me for the first time, I said, and I observed her body and her speaking style and her breath. And I said, so can you tell me about this anxiety that you have that's present? And she said, well, that comes from my family dynamic. And she went into a little bit of that. So I find often in my voice work, I'm doing diagnostic work, right? That is connected to somebody's entire experience. So I could see from the moment she sat down that there was an underlying anxiety. And when she spoke about it, I said, okay, well, now we have an idea of what we're dealing with. Through the physiological exercises that we engaged in, she learned to manage her level of anxiety to the point where she could access her breath, and her voice could now travel easily on her breath. Thereby, she could relax enough to communicate. Okay. She could relax enough to interact with her patients in such a way that they felt safe. She could relax enough that her superiors thought that she was competent. She later on sent me a message saying, I've now landed a fantastic job in Ottawa. I'm so happy. Thank you very much for everything you did for me.
So it's the use of the word communicate, for example. it's a fascinating word to me because we use it a lot, but we use it without really thinking about what it means.
Yeah.
We often think that it's about what we broadcast. It's about what we say, like a parent will say to a child, what did I say? And I would invite people to start saying, what did you hear? There's a difference, right? A huge
Yes.
difference. And
Yes.
that's really where this comes from. This idea.
And what did you mean?
Oh, that's a different conversation again.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
What I try to do is I try to, in the drilling down in order to build back up again on better foundations, what I've decided to do is literally go one thing at a time, one sliver of info, right? Literally one input. So you're absolutely right. What do you mean? Totally different thing as well.
True.
Because of course we use words very loosely, and what I mean when I say a word and what you mean when you say or hear a word can be very disconnected, very different.
True.
So let's, but a simple way of doing the communication thing is to actually ask, what did you hear? And then you're absolutely right. What does that mean to you? Absolutely right. So what interests me though in what you said is, this person had extreme presence of self.
Yes.
To do that, to say, wait a minute, something isn't quite right. I'm not getting the results, the interaction, the feedback, the something, the promotion, the something. And that's really what I'd love to know. If you know, what is that she went, wait a minute.
Well, it's a really good question. And I believe in the case of this particular client, it was the cost that was being paid. There was a cost in not being able to communicate well. She could not move forward in her career. Whether she was aware of the low-grade anxiety before, likely, but thought it manageable. But now this was preventing her from moving forward in her career. So it needed to be addressed.
Yeah. So I wonder if it was somebody external, somebody perhaps in HR or a manager, somebody who mentioned something that made her think, or if she actually was able to arrive at that herself, which would be a huge thing actually, because we often don't have the ability to look in that way at ourselves.
I see what you're saying. Yes, she did get that direct feedback, which is basically, we can't really rely on you with the patients. Right?
Okay. Yes. So it's a trust issue, and she realized that she is trustworthy.
Exactly.
But there must be something wrong in how she is connecting or how people feed off of what she's saying and doing.
And it had nothing to do with the science or her understanding of the process of giving birth. It had everything to do with her ability to communicate.
So this is the thing for me, right? It's taken me all these years to realize something really important, okay? And just a bit of a segue to say, so I have a master's in medical engineering. I've spent decades on TV. I'm a STEMinist as well as a left and right brain. All these things. Who cares is the point. Who cares about everything I know, can do, or you, or anyone for that matter, if you cannot do one key thing, which is communicate effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
Madness.
It is extraordinary, right? It just really comes down to a very simple but profound core skill. Absolutely.
Which is communicating effectively. Absolutely. So let's talk again, drill down to voice and how you deal with this. Somebody like this person came to you and said, I'm not getting the results at work that I want, that I deserve, whatever. You sat, you observed, you realized actually she's carrying a lot of perhaps anxiety, stress, and so on. And if you could give us a sort of helicopter view of what it is that you would do in that situation.
Well, every client is unique, and everybody's situation is very specific to their own life circumstances. But there are some things that are universal, right? There are some principles that carry across the board. One of the things that we need to learn how to do in our body is learn to trust our bones, for example. Our bones were designed to hold our bodies up, but many of us don't allow the bones to do their job. We're holding in our muscles to the point where the bones can't do their job. So one of the things I teach people how to do is trust the bones through grounding, either through being seated or standing. Once that happens, they find that the musculature of the body softens and releases away from the bones, creating space. Space for what? Space for breath. Now, what can that breath be utilized for? For speaking, their voice. So all of a sudden, they have access to a kind of breath and resonance they didn't have before through observing 3 simple principles: grounding, breath, and alignment. And this is across the board. Now, then I get specific or, finesse some of these principles based on certain exercises, but these things are universal. Once you learn to trust your bones and you can let the musculature soften, you can access the breath, the diaphragm can drop, you can breathe, you can thereby use that to actually communicate.
I love the image and the idea of trusting your bones. Absolutely brilliant. And if we think about, sayings like, I can feel it in my bones, that kind of, it's that we need to come up with something that goes from the bone, trusting your bones, to creating space. And you know what, Ausar, the other thing is that you're creating space to breathe.
Yes.
Something before the voice, before anything else, so few of us do properly. I mean, we're doing it without thinking, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be alive. However, where we breathe from, how we breathe, all these sorts of things, they are key to so many other stuff. And it's literally and physically and physiologically the difference between being nourished,
yes,
or not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tesla discovered that the air around us is charged with energy. Electromagnetic energy literally exists around us at all times. And our breath is in direct exchange with that energy. If we can't breathe thoroughly and completely, we are literally starving of the life force that is around us at all times. And once you can breathe, you can access that level of energy and then use it to communicate.
Can you keep going? I've had a shutter meltdown here.
Yeah.
So you can talk and you can hear me, I assume.
I can, yeah.
I'll be back with you imminently. I mean, look, Ausar, absolutely. So can you then literally take us through a little thing that people can do if they feel that they are not breathing in a nourishing way? What would a simple thing be?
That's a great question. There are so many exercises that one can do. And I'm always playing with this. So recently I was reading an extraordinary book by James Nestor called Breath or Breathe. And he talked about how important the exhale is. Well, of course, yogis have known this for millennia, right? So one thing you can do very simply is to breathe in for 3 and out for 5. And observe the pauses in between the breaths. So if you allow the breath to come into the nose for 3 counts.
Mm-hmm. So should we do that together then? So
sure.
In 3, what about the holding of the breath though?
Let's take a pause. So let's let the breath come into the nose for 3. 1, 2, 3. Observe the pause. Let the breath fall out the mouth for 5. Pause. Wait for the breath to want to come back in. Come into the nose for 3. Observe the pause. Let it fall out the mouth for 5. And see if you can allow your throat to soften and open, because I could hear a little bit of restriction in the back of your throat, right? Let the breath come up and over the soft palate, right?
But you're right, absolutely. And in fact, I hope everybody's trying this. One thing that I remembered when we were in preparation for doing this was in my old life when I used to travel a lot and was on BBC and that sort of thing. I would reach the end of our filming days. So what we did was we had 2 days a week when we would be on location in a different country. And it was a very intense situation. I mean, we covered the Arab Spring, pre-spring, during the Arab Spring revolutions, post, a whole decade plus of that sort of environment and goings on. The point is, we'd be rushing around, different time zone, in the airplane, at the airplane. At the end of it, I had a very simple job of sitting down and reading off of a piece of paper to record the voiceover, excuse me, for certain scripts that we were going to be using to cement the program together. And I would fall apart every week because of everything that happened in those 2 days. It just culminated into me being incapable of reading simple words and getting my voice to cooperate. So absolutely. And these are the sorts of things that I've taught myself or just borrowed from other disciplines and things like that. And it's really interesting because, for example, I hide before I'm on stage. I like to be in my quiet zone and not interact with people. And it's usually where I see other people who are going to be on stage who are falling apart. They're nervous. They know exactly what they want to say, but they're getting worked up internally.
Yes.
And really, the most effective thing to do then is just to share, hey, put your hand on your belly, breathe into it, make it into a balloon.
Yes.
Hold your breath for a couple of counts,
Yes.
breathe out slowly. So it's just having those tools at our disposal. It's amazing that it's instant. Again, it's free, and we can do it for ourselves. Guess what, Ausar? That we don't do it, do we?
No. We often need a reminder, right?
Yes. Hopefully before you leave, right? But yeah.
It's absolutely. And I love that image of, because I think in our last conversation, I shared that, one of my favorite things as an actor was sitting in that quiet place before getting on stage, because there is nourishment there.
That's right. Absolutely. So for me, it is that zone of getting rid of the outside world and tuning into myself. That's the thing, right?
Yeah.
So if you were to describe voice, how would you describe it and define it? What is voice to you?
That is a fascinating question, because in my experience, I've healed myself through my voice. I've given birth to aspects of myself through my voice. I continue to evolve myself through my voice. So for me, the voice is a divine gift. The ability to speak comes from someplace on high. The human faculty to speak is a divine gift. And our voices are a direct connection to the life of our soul on this planet. As such, it connects you to your higher self, if you allow it. And it can be a guiding light, a litmus test for you, a continual sort of touch point or touchstone to let you know where you are at, which is why NASA could hear in those high-achieving astronauts when they were a little bit off, even in the slightest, because the voice reflects all of that, right? So yes, it's a communication tool. Yes, it can be an artistic, expressive tool, but it is also one of the most revealing, potent, and direct vehicles of development you will ever encounter. There's no place to run, there's no place to hide. It's happening in real time. You have to confront your issues as they happen right there in the moment, physiologically, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. It's right there in the moment.
And I suppose one thing is to think about voice as noise versus words.
Yes. Sound.
Sound.
Vibration.
Much nicer word. Thank you. Sound. So it's that
Frequency. Yes.
Anything that you decide to output, essentially.
No. And if I may, which is why I say to my clients and students, voice is voice is voice is voice is voice, whether you are being heard or not, whether you are speaking or not. Because what happens after a period of time of becoming in tune with your body and your breath, your voice will radiate even when you're not speaking. So one of the higher levels of leadership is being able to walk into a room and change the atmosphere of the room simply by what you are carrying in your body. So really good leaders have allowed their message, their context, their mission, their purpose, their values and principles to be distilled down on a cellular level in their bodies. So when they walk in the room, it is felt. Before they even have spoken a word, they're radiating what they're about. And I love this aspect of the work.
It's interesting because what I've done with the Core Skills series is broken things down to really simple, how can I do it stuff. For example, the one on voice is called Getting Your Voice Ready. It's a really simple thing. So center yourself and be heard.
Yes.
I like to focus on the practical, meaning, look, we've got so many self-help books and things out there. What I find often missing is what I call the human application of knowledge. So we know all this stuff. Okay, great. How can I use it? What can I do with it? Don't tell me what I can do. How do I do it? And that's how I've broken it down. So the voice one is literally, how do I get my voice ready? Then there's one that's about presence. Presence is really what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Here. And it is the bringing together for me of everything, of the way you are, of the voice, of the thing, of that thing actually that you can't really define. It's that presence, okay? And in fact, it's the thing that people notice. I say, it's the thing that people notice about you even when you're not there.
Yes.
That's how I put it. And that's exactly what
Absolutely.
you are describing, I believe.
I am. And for me, presence is really a function of integrity, right? To be integrous and to have an integral connection between one's heart, mind, body, soul, and spirit. In simple terms, a connection between head, heart, and gut. And the physiological exercises in voice work are designed to create a direct communication channel between head, heart, and gut. More appropriately, from gut, heart to head. So the convictions that live in your viscera, in your gut, right, travel up freely on your breath. They're filtered by the wisdom of your heart and finally shaped by the clarity of your mind. That is what we look to create in a free-flowing voice. It's integral for actors. They can't have a career without it, but I would argue that it's useful for everyone to be able to have that kind of sense of integrity of self. It shows up in your communication style, and it shows up even when you're not speaking.
And I love the image that you just presented, which is gut upwards.
Yes.
I believe that the gut is our first brain, not our
indeed.
brain. In fact, there are more cells there than there are anywhere else in our body because of the microbiome and so on. That's a whole different discussion, folks. Stay tuned for another episode where we dive into that.
Yes.
But ultimately, the point is that it's all connected. Where it is a jigsaw puzzle, everything is connected. So yeah, I think if we just look at our gut and make that the center of our universe, a lot of other things will fit into place. Yeah,
absolutely. And so much of voice work focuses in I'm doing just that. This becomes the center of the universe for sure.
So I want to bring up a question that was asked, and you've seen this because I put it out there as well, which is, unfortunately, I couldn't actually hear what was being said at the time. So it's kind of ironic. I could hear somebody was saying something to me. I was on a live event, a Q&A session, and I had to ask, I think at least 3 times, I'm so sorry, I can't quite make out what you're saying. And this person was saying, what do you think about my voice?
Right.
So, that I could actually hear. So you've seen what I think, because I replied to this question. What do you make of that situation when somebody asks, what do you think of my voice?
I really quite liked your response because I would echo what you shared. It's more importantly, what does that particular individual think about their voice? And deeper than that, what does that particular individual think, feel about themselves? Because that's what their voice is revealing, right? And often what happens in voice work is that people have to come to terms with that, right? And it can go back to a particular childhood trauma or adult trauma or experience that began to shape how they communicated from that point on. Or it can be something very benign, But by working physiologically, one eventually comes in direct contact with that particular block or impediment. And the wonderful thing about voice work is that it gives you a chance to resolve that physiologically in the body. But it emanates out from the body into the mind, into the heart, into the psyche, into every other aspect of your life. So when you pass through this particular threshold or portal, it's a physiological event that emanates outward into other aspects of your life, and it's undeniable.
And not only that, it also changes the way we are, literally, because the brain is a fascinating thing. So yes, the gut is really the key for me, but the brain is so important too, and it changes the way it is. So the structures and the pathways and all that stuff constantly. So every nanosecond as we go along through life, things are changing as we go along. So the point is that when you do that work that you just described, it means that that person's brain structure has literally changed, and they are a different person then. So it's a part of shedding that other thing that happened before and being the next thing. Yeah, fascinating, really. It is fascinating. You see, this is the thing. I wish that we were all exposed to this when we were much younger, at school, at university, at anything. Well, throughout life, really. These are the skills and tools, I believe, that are key, core. I call them core skills.
It's a great term for them.
And you know what? We could say, you will use this in your personal life, you will use this in your professional life, and all that sort of spiel. Actually, you know what, Ausar? We use these core skills every second of every day.
Yeah.
So, hey, let's come together and figure them out and move forward,
Yeah.
I don't want to go over our allotted time, but I do want to take a few more minutes, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I think of it as a rapid fire. I just want to ask you what these things mean to you in a word or two. Deal?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
To be seen.
To be seen. Whew. Wow.
When do you feel seen? Make it about you. When do you feel seen? Or when do people that you work with feel seen? What's that thing? Bing. Oh.
Well, that I can answer more readily, because I think it is what allows me to be successful as a coach, is that everybody who I work with is seen very distinctly for who they are. And that allows me to tailor the work very specifically to them and their needs. And I love that interplay, and I learned that from my teacher, who was masterful at really sort of, despite all the experience he had, letting it all go and humbly saying, what's happening in this moment right now between me and this other human being? And that allows for that moment of discovery, of exchange, where needs can be met, goals can be achieved, and pathways unraveled.
So it's like being validated in a way, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, validated because you are seen. And then the next question is, what does it mean to be heard?
You're asking some really great questions. I don't know how these are these rapid fire questions? These seems like be way more thoughtful questions. What does it mean to be?
For example, what is it for you in yourself? When do you feel heard, or what does it mean to be heard? It means what? To feel. How does it feel? Give me a feeling that's associated with it.
Well, I'm gonna become really sort of benign and domestic. My 18-year-old son is home now for the holidays over the Christmas break, and in the past I would get very sort of loud and obnoxious with him when he left too many dishes or plates in his room, and I found myself saying the other day, there are too many cups and bowls in your room. Can you take them down? He said, oh yes, yeah, sure, no problem. And I was really proud of myself for not being belligerent, not being judgmental, not having a tone in my voice, but to simply saying calmly and patiently, could you remove all those cups? And he received that. He didn't feel judged or attacked. And I'm like, you know what? I'm growing as a parent. I identified that as progress. That was a much better communication style than I had in the past, and he appreciated it.
Okay.
That's, to me, is being heard.
So what you're saying is that being heard equals getting the result you're after.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Without it necessarily costing you what you don't want to cost you.
Yeah. So absolutely. Right?
I don't want the friction in the relationship. He's here for a short period of time. I don't want that to be tumultuous. I'd like it to be harmonious. So I got the result, but I have to choose how I was going to address the situation. Right.
So here's my theory on life. Are you ready for this? This is the big thing. So the first big thing was that actually it doesn't matter what degree you have, how clever you are, who cares if you can't communicate effectively. Yeah. That's my first ping, right? The second ping is, if we knew how to self-advocate in a way that means that people tune into us because we're actually tuning into them to start with. That's the key. So it's not an imposition. I'm not imposing what I want to do. So self-advocating in this other way that I'm talking about, where we tune into each other, it's an exchange, right, of energy, information, result. The world would be brilliant. Seriously.
Yes. And now I have an answer for your earlier question. When you said to me, what it is to be heard, my response now would be listening.
Absolutely. On the nail. Right. Yeah. Listening. Right? Yeah.
Because that is how one puts this up in the position to be heard, is by listening. Right. I think somebody asked my teacher once, what is your voice? And he said, your response. Right. But in order to respond, one had to have allowed himself to be present enough to listen.
So one of the tools that I invented for the online courses that I do, it actually gets people to write down the key words, the way the other person speaks in this, so that they are essentially tuning into that person.
Yes.
Because that person will never tune into you if you can't tune into them.
Absolutely true.
So that's how I get people to shift that, just again by partly being practical. And then that mind shift also happens, because I think that one of the struggles for us humans is that we're clever, we know a lot, people keep on talking at us and telling us what we should do, but actually very few tools exist that enable us to do. That's the big thing. So that's really what I'm interested in. It's in how can we enable people to do, which is what you're doing with your work.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, that's a very clear practical tool. Another one is mirroring, body language, for example, right? Or saying, if what I heard you say is such and such and such, and asking for confirmation. I mean, they call that active listening. These are sort of established tools that people can utilize in order to enhance the communication, right? But it all comes down to being able to be really there in your body, in the present moment, receiving, giving, and taking in the active exchange. And those tools facilitate that.
So my last thought pod that I'm going to ask you is this: what does sustaining success mean to you?
Sustaining success to me means having the courage and the conviction to follow your sense of purpose, your callings, your own internal unctions, your own internal instincts, your own sort of moral compass, tuning into that on a day-to-day basis, moment to moment, literally breath to breath, is what allows for sustainable success. Because then you're always in a direct feedback mechanism with the deeper sense of who you are, who you want to be, and where you're going.
And I'm just going to read this out. So, Aaron, it's about consciousness in a different perception. I mean, we've got some lovely comments, by the way. Thank you. But because I have to physically allow them to show.
Well, I just want to, it absolutely is about consciousness. Absolutely is about consciousness. And the voice is a direct reflection of one's consciousness, right? And by allowing it to tell you where you are, literally, how true are you being to yourself, moment to moment, right? It allows you to course correct. When you were flying all over the place, engaging in what sounds like a fantastic career opportunity, right? But there were real prices that were being paid, right? That perhaps were buried in your subconscious that would erupt every 6 months and have to say, we need to evaluate, is this what we want to be doing with our energies? Are we living out our purpose? Are we vibrating at the frequency we want to be vibrating at? Your voice is asking you to take stock.
Right? It was more like telling me.
Yes, indeed. I was trying to be polite about it, but yes, it was telling you.
You're going to do this now. We're not going to listen to you anymore.
Absolutely. Right?
So, absolutely. For example, we trust people who have deeper voices, and I'm feeding off of the resonating thing. So it doesn't mean that somebody has to be born with a deep voice and be, a man or masculine. It means actually deep for each person. So everybody has this range, right?
Yes, absolutely. We have this full range of sounds available to us. Absolutely.
And so there's a great little exercise that somebody in the theatre here in England did to prepare for being on stage, and I just use it and share it with my students. And it is this: she would go around saying "hip flask," because she would have some beverage in the hip flask, and basically she would go around saying "hip flask, hip flask."
I like that. That's a good one.
And that's how I go through life saying it.
I love that exercise.
About you deepening your own ability, your own voice, but it comes from actually literally the way you vibrate and resonate within. That's the point, isn't it?
Absolutely. And when I at the beginning of my training as an actor, I used to speak like this in my chest. I would talk here because I wanted you to take me seriously and I wanted you to think I was strong, right? So this is how I sounded. You never got these tones in my voice. I never allowed my facial bones to vibrate, right? You hear the difference, right? Now, if I take away my chest resonance and only speak in my face, and I've taken away that bottom register in my voice, you get these bones, but it's not the same complete sense of integration, right? So I may sound smart, but it's a disembodied sound.
You may sound smart, but nobody's listening.
But nobody's listening,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Right? So I actually now have to integrate my chest voice, which gives you access to my heart. And if I drop my pelvis and get into my pelvic bones, now you have that whole range of sound that allows you to receive me in my entirety. Without each of those sounds connected to gut, heart, and head, you trust me less.
It is fascinating. I hope that you will come back again, Ausar, and share. Perhaps we'll do a practical session together.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love that.
Do something else. Yeah, move this conversation forward, and perhaps go back to the beginning, which was us being very cerebral about the whole thing, right? Listen, our voice. It is magnificent. It is magical. It's free, and it's instant, right?
Instant.
What's your thing? Your voice is
everything.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it?
It is.
So thank you very, very much for joining us. I am thrilled that you're here. If people send me other questions and emails, I'm going to share them with you if that's okay, if you allow me to.
Yeah.
And look, if you ever get a chance to use a brain scan in the way that we spoke about at the beginning to see how Jamaican you is different to Canadian you.
That's a whole other conversation.
That'd be really, really good, wouldn't it? I'd love to do that myself because I know that I literally feel different when I speak Arabic, for example.
It's a whole other body.
Yeah.
It's a whole other body.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because the idea of voice and how it's imprinted on us and who we are, I mean, it's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
I haven't checked this out, but I have heard that Albert Einstein, the last words he said on his deathbed are lost to us because what happens is that when we get older, the brain accesses different information in different ways. And his native tongue was German. So on his deathbed, his last words allegedly were in German.
Yes.
And the person in the room didn't speak German, so we don't know what he said. So, but it's really interesting. So listen, thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Yes.
Let us tune into ourselves.
Absolutely.
Tune into others so that others tune into us. Yes. Right? Tune into ourselves. Tune into others so that people can tune into us. That's my big takeaway.
It's a great recipe for addressing some of the world's problems, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You know, if only, I think they should all join us on this prod.
Let's make that our aim the next time. Let's solve the world's problems together next time.
Any suggestions, please email them to me. You have been an angel. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us and sharing your wisdom. We'll see you next time.
It's been a real treat. Thank you.
You're welcome. And to everybody else, thank you for being here, for sharing your lovely messages. I'm really sorry I didn't have a chance to read them out. Remember, if you want to find out more, go to finding-nima.com. In fact, I will just put up here we go. findingnima.com. It's on the screen. Do check out the Core Skills series. It is so important. It's part of your every second of life. See you next time. Bye for now.